The appointment of Lord Richard Hermer as Attorney General has proven to be one of Keir Starmer's most controversial decisions, criticised as a left-wing ideologue by opponents, including Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick. Hermer has been accused of prioritising international law over national interest, obstructing government initiatives, displaying ideological fervour in legal interpretations. But is he truly a liability, or does he serve as a useful distraction, absorbing political attacks that might otherwise be directed at Starmer or his senior ministers? And Hermer, a long-term human rights lawyer and Starmer's close friend, his legal career has been marked by cases that challenge the state on issues of colonial legacy, reparations, human rights, and his role in securing help for the Kenyan victims of British colonial abuse, his legal advice to Caribbean nations seeking compensation for historical injustices has cemented his reputation as a lawyer deeply concerned with addressing Britain's imperial past. And these credentials, of course, make him a lightning rod for right-wing critics who argue that he's the wrong man to be helming the job at the centre of government when he harbours such disdain for British history. Farage's accusation that Hermer hates our history and our country stems from podcast comments in which Hermer argued that British schoolchildren should be taught about the violence of the empire and that phrases like control our borders are dehumanising. These views, shared before he entered government, have provided ammunition for those who see him as emblematic of an ideological shift within Starmer's Labour Party. And Jenrick went further, branding him Jeremy Corbyn in a barrister's wig, citing his support for reparations, his past advocacy for Palestinian claimants, and his opposition to border controls. If that were the case, then we would have a significantly better Home Office at the moment than we've got. We don't have, so therefore all he's doing is making a lot of noise, if that is the case. One of the key flashpoints in the last week has been the debate over Hermer's suitability about Britain's decision to cede sovereignty over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, and this agreement under which Britain will pay nearly £90 million annually for a 99-year lease to lease back Diego Garcia for the UK-US military base, has been framed by critics as a surrender. And the opposition argues that Hermer prioritised legal concerns over strategic and geopolitical considerations, undermining Britain's negotiating position and leaving the government open to accusations of weakness. Defenders of Hermer, including sources within Number 10, argue that he was simply upholding the rule of law in accordance with UN and International Court of Justice rulings that considered Britain's continued administration of the islands unlawful. Nonetheless, his involvement has provided a rallying point for critics of the government's foreign policy, particularly among Conservative MPs and figures in the security establishment who see the deal as reckless. Beyond the Chagos Islands, there are broader concerns about Hermer's legal interpretations, which have caused a freeze within government. Ministers reportedly complain that his insistence on legal caution is obstructing policy initiatives, particularly in areas where Labour is attempting to adopt a more electorally palpable stance on border control and national security. And the conflict between Labour's political pragmatism and Hermer's strict legalistic approach has led to tensions within Cabinet, with some suggesting he fails to recognise that his role is to serve the government's legal needs rather than to act as an independent arbiter. His statement to the Council of Europe that the UK would never withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights was seen as a direct contradiction of Labour's attempt to appear tough on migration. This has led to accusations that he's out of step with the government's political strategy and failing to align his legal advice with his ministerial priorities. Starmer's continued defence of Hermer suggests a deep loyalty to his old friend, and the Prime Minister has repeatedly dismissed calls for his sacking, instead insisting that he has the full confidence of the Attorney General. Yet, internal discontent is growing, and with a cabinet reshuffle expected in May, questions linger about whether Hermer can survive in his current role. Starmer has demonstrated in the past that he's willing to sacrifice close allies when political necessity demands it. Figures like Sue Gray and Emily Thornberry have been swiftly moved aside when they no longer served his strategic objectives and got in the way of what he was doing. If Hermer's presence in government becomes untenable, particularly as Labour navigates a difficult balance between legal adherence and political pragmatism, Starmer may be forced to act again. The final question remains, is Hermer actually a liability, or does his prominence serve as a convenient distraction? And while his controversies attract attention and criticism, they also provide a buffer for Starmer and senior ministers. Attacks on Hermer from the right, particularly from Reform UK, serve to deflect attention from the broader Labour government, allowing Starmer to position himself as a moderate in contrast to more radical left-wing figures in his administration. If Starmer ultimately decides to let Hermer go, it will not be due to ideological misalignment, but rather a calculated political decision. Until then, Hermer's high-profile role continues to draw fire that might otherwise target the Prime Minister directly, a role that, for now, Labour probably finds useful.